He heard her say it before the gavel fell, a steady voice that carried like a blade through velvet. "Detective Holt, you put an innocent woman in the ground and then you taught the town to clap." The room did not move at first, because her words felt like thunder that had not yet been seen, but Raymond felt them hit bone and he did not breathe. As Elena Vargas lifted her chin and looked at him, as if she had finally reached the door she had been walking toward for years and had decided to walk straight through it, he stood at the witness stand with one hand on the Bible and the other raised, heart pressing against his ribs, sweat prickling under the collar where his badge tugged at the wool of his suit like a small and relentless weight, and the judge told the courtroom to be silent. But the silence had a pulse now, and every eye rested on the woman who had just dared to say the thing people only think when they are very far from home and very sure no one can hear them. Raymond knew the dance of courtrooms, the measured voice, the careful story, the way a man could turn truth into a clear pane of glass and stand behind it looking clean, and he had done it 1,000 times until the movements were muscle memory. But this time the glass felt fogged. This time the story cut across the grain, because Elena Vargas did not stare with the look he knew from countless defendants, that sharp animal gaze that begged and lied and flared with short-lived anger. She watched with a kind of sorrow that made him feel like a boy who had been caught carrying a stone he could not explain. The prosecutor tried to recover the rhythm, asking for the record to reflect that the defendant had blurted out an accusation unrelated to the fraud charges, and the judge rapped the bench and warned Elena to hold her tongue. But Elena did not look away from Raymond, and he could not look away from her, because that single sentence had found a keyhole deep inside him and turned it. He told himself it was a tactic, a trick designed to rattle him, yet the word innocent echoed with a face he had not let himself remember in years, a woman who had vanished when a cold wind still owned the streets at night. Clara Wynne with a green scarf and a small laugh. A case that had never made sense until he had forced it to make sense by closing the file under insufficient evidence, and now Elena Vargas stood there as if she had been waiting beside that file the whole time. The prosecutor cleared his throat and asked Raymond to resume, asked him to confirm that he had followed procedure when he arrested Ms. Vargas for falsifying documents to steal from a local charity, asked him to explain how he had tracked the bank transfers, and Raymond did as asked because that was the machine he knew how to run. Hearing his own voice move through places where he did not feel present, words about chain of custody and probable cause and the clean bite of numbers that pointed toward guilt like a compass that always behaved. But while his lips moved, Elena's quiet stare held him, not furious, not pleading, almost compassionate, which made it worse, because compassion is a mirror that shows a man his shape, and in that reflection Raymond saw the edges of a life he had built from certainty, a marriage that had become more habit than home, a career that had conferred applause like a church hymn after the sermon, and the belief that the badge at his chest was a shield that meant he was always the one rescuing, rather than the one being rescued. He wondered why she had chosen those words, why she had said put an innocent woman in the ground, wondered if she knew about Clara, wondered if someone had told her or if it was chance, or if the universe simply had a taste for irony and chose now to feed. When the prosecutor finished and the defense rose, the air shifted because the defense attorney was young and eager, and certain he could chip a legend, but Elena touched his sleeve and shook her head almost imperceptibly, then asked to speak. And the judge sighed the way a tired mother sighs when a child asks for one more story, and allowed it for 1 minute only. Elena kept her hands folded as if in prayer, and said she wanted the record to reflect that Detective Holt had served the town for 3 decades, and that most of those years brought safety. And people murmured because praise from a defendant felt like a trick, but then she said she would show that his good work had been weaponized by men who hid behind him, that she would show he had been used to bury the truth, and that she would show the name of the buried truth if the court would let her speak across the next hearings. And she looked at Raymond when she said used, as if to tell him she knew where the string ended. Margaret sat in the gallery with her coat folded over her lap, even though the room was warm, and Raymond could feel her watching not as a wife who wanted to help, but as a woman measuring an earthquake for its aftershocks. And he thought of the quiet dinners, the small questions left unanswered, the way sleep had lately come with a humming under the surface, a kind of warning note only he could hear. He felt shame not because of a proven lie, but because of the possibility that he had let something terrible become ordinary with his silence. And shame is a heavy thing when it arrives all at once, heavier than the badge, heavier than the jury's eyes, The judge called a recess, wood cracking under the gavel as if the room itself had bones, and people stood, papers rustled, bailiffs moved with their bland authority, and Raymond remained at the stand for a heartbeat too long, unable to decide whether his lungs were empty or simply afraid to be full. As he stepped down, Elena turned slightly so only he could see her mouth, and she said two words without sound, just the shape of them, Clara Wynne, and the hallway of years between him and that winter case collapsed like a building that had been poorly built and finally met a true wind. He walked past her with the practiced calm of a man who knows cameras are watching. But inside him a thin door opened and the dark behind it breathed. The courthouse emptied like a lung exhaling, but Raymond Holt stood in the echo long after the last juror left, watching dust drift through the shafts of light like slow ash. He told himself it was routine, another case, another defendant lashing out. But the words she mouthed had carved through that armor he'd worn for decades. Clara Wynne. That name had not been spoken aloud in years, and yet the soundless shape of it had the weight of thunder. He walked outside into the hard afternoon glare, where his car waited in the reserved spot, his name printed neatly beneath Chief Investigator. To everyone else, that title still meant something. To him, at that moment, it felt like a lie. The badge at his chest burned with the kind of heat that wasn't from the sun. Inside the car, he sat for a while before starting the engine. He reached into the glove compartment for a peppermint and found instead a small folded envelope. It had no address, no postmark, just his name scrawled in thin, deliberate handwriting. The paper smelled faintly of lavender and smoke. Inside was a single sentence, ink pressed into the fibers with a heavy hand. Truth has a way of finding you. He stared at it, pulse thudding. The courthouse steps shimmered in his rearview mirror, and for a second he thought he saw someone watching. An outline, perhaps a woman in a gray coat, but when he blinked, it was gone. By the time he reached home, the daylight had softened. Margaret met him at the door with that practiced smile she wore when she didn't want to ask questions. The smell of soup drifted from the kitchen, but there was something metallic underneath it, something tired. "You look pale," she said. "It's just the lights in the courtroom," he answered. "Too bright. Or too dark," she murmured, turning back to the stove. At dinner, she talked about their daughter, about the neighbors selling their house, about the church charity needing volunteers. Raymond nodded in the right places, but the words rolled over him like water over glass. The letter sat in his pocket like a hot stone. When he finally reached for the salt, his hand trembled just enough for her to notice. "Ray," she said softly, "is it about that woman, the one on trial?" He looked up. "What makes you think that?" "You flinched when they said her name on the news." He hadn't realized it had reached the news already. The headline must have been some version of Detective Holt testifies in charity fraud case. They always loved to print his name. He made for good ink. But tonight the thought made him sick. Later, when Margaret went to bed, he slipped into his study. The walls were lined with framed commendations, plaques, photos of him shaking hands with mayors, chiefs, even senators. They looked like ghosts now, every smile captured at the exact moment before rot begins. He unlocked the filing cabinet, one he hadn't opened in years, and pulled out the old cold case file, Clara Wynne, missing person, December 2009. He flipped through the yellowing pages, witness statements, photos, a single shoe recovered near the river. He remembered her face too well, bright, alert, a social worker who believed too much in people. The kind who made enemies just by refusing to stop caring. He had closed the file after Mason Hale, his partner then, told him to let it go. "We can't save everyone, Ray. Some people just disappear," Mason had said, smiling the way a man smiles when he's already decided which truth to bury. Raymond hadn't questioned it, not really. The department was family, and family didn't turn on its own. Now looking at the file, he felt something cold crawl down his spine. The dates didn't line up. The forensic report, Hale's signature on it, was dated 2 weeks after the search had officially ended. "Why?" A sound broke the silence. From outside near the porch, footsteps on gravel. Raymond froze, then moved quietly to the window. A figure stood near his mailbox, head down, gloved hands slipping another envelope inside. When the porch light flicked on, the figure vanished into the dark. He opened the door and stepped into the chill air. The night smelled of wet leaves and old secrets. Inside the mailbox lay another letter, same handwriting. This time it read, "You buried her twice." Once in paper, once in silence, his throat tightened. Somewhere inside the house, Margaret's footsteps crossed the hall and he folded the letter quickly, slipping it into his pocket before she saw. Sleep didn't come. Around midnight, he drove to the river where Clara's car had been found. The bridge rails were rusted now, the warning sign faded. The moon painted the water in broken glass. He stood there for a long time, hands gripping the cold metal, and whispered her name, not as a detective, not as a man defending his record, but as someone who finally admitted he might have failed her. Then he saw it, a shadow moving near the trees across the bank. A woman's silhouette standing still watching him. Too far to see her face, but the posture, calm, unwavering, was unmistakable. Helena Vargas. She didn't move when his flashlight found her, didn't flinch, just stood there as if waiting for him to acknowledge something he wasn't ready to say aloud. Then she turned and walked into the woods, leaving behind the faint sound of something metallic dropping onto the rocks. Raymond crossed the bridge and found it moments later. A small police badge, tarnished but real with the initials MH carved into the back. Mason Hale. The river roared softly beneath him, carrying secrets downstream. And for the first time in his life, Detective Raymond Holt felt afraid. Not of criminals, not of danger, but of the truth that had been waiting, patient and silent for him to finally look it in the eye. The morning came gray and tight with fog, the kind that swallowed sound before it could travel. Raymond sat at the kitchen table, staring at the badge he'd found by the river. MH. Mason Hale. His old partner's initials glinted faintly, half buried under years of grime and guilt. Margaret moved quietly behind him, making coffee, pretending not to see what lay between his hands. She had learned over the years that questions were dangerous things around him. He answered them like he was still under oath. But now, even silence felt like an interrogation. She set the mug beside him. "You were gone again last night." He didn't look up. "Couldn't sleep. You went to the river, didn't you?" Her voice was careful, the way people talk around broken glass. He met her eyes, the same blue that used to steady him, and for a second he wanted to tell her everything. But the words died in his throat. He lied instead, quietly. "I needed to think." Margaret studied him a moment longer, then nodded. "You've been thinking your whole life, Ray. Maybe it's time to start remembering." That line hit harder than it should have. He took his coat and left before she could see the flicker of fear that crossed his face. Outside, the fog pressed close, turning the familiar streets into something foreign. He drove to the precinct. It was early, barely 7, but the building was already humming. Young officers with coffee cups, phones ringing, printers whirring. Raymond moved through it like a ghost, nodding to greetings he barely heard, and headed straight for the records room. The room smelled of dust and stale air, the scent of things deliberately forgotten. He keyed in his clearance code and pulled the cold case log from 2009. Clara Wynne. There it was again, her name in black ink marked closed by lead investigator Holt. He turned the page. A second signature appeared at the bottom of the supplemental report. Mason Hale. The date was wrong again, 2 weeks after Clara's file should have been archived. Worse, attached to it was a form marked Evidence Transfer Authorization, a chain of custody for a silver bracelet. The signature beside the received by line wasn't Hale's. It was his own, except he didn't remember ever signing it. Raymond's chest tightened. He flipped the page over and found the forensic image stapled behind it, a silver bracelet engraved with the initials CW. It was the one Clara's sister had described when she first reported her missing. Raymond had written in his own notes that it was never recovered. So how the hell was there a photo of it in evidence with his name on the receipt? His hand shook slightly as he traced the edges of the paper. "Going down memory lane, old man." The voice came from the doorway, low, amused, familiar. Mason Hale stood there in his usual easy stance, coffee in hand, badge gleaming. The same grin that used to disarm suspects now looked like a weapon. "Didn't expect to see you here this early," Mason said. "You digging up Ghost?" Raymond straightened. "I could ask you the same thing." Mason chuckled. "Ah, come on. You know me. I like to keep an eye on the past. Make sure it stays buried." The words were light, but they carried an edge. Raymond slipped the file closed, locking the tremor in his hands. You signed off on a transfer in the Wynn case. Why? Mason's smile thinned. Because you told me to. Don't you remember? I never did. Mason sipped his coffee. Well, that's the beauty of paperwork, Ray. It remembers for you. Something dark slid beneath the surface of his tone. Raymond's mind raced. Elena Vargas had said she would expose the men who hid behind him. Was Mason one of them? Or was he the only one? He watched Mason leave the room, easy as ever, humming under his breath. For a moment, Raymond thought he saw the corner of a lavender envelope sticking out of Mason's jacket pocket. By afternoon, he was sitting in his car again, parked outside Elena Vargas's apartment complex, a rundown brick building near the edge of town, where paint peeled from window frames and stray cats ruled the fences. He waited nearly an hour before she appeared, walking out in a dark coat, head high, the same unflinching calm she'd carried in the courtroom. She didn't look surprised to see him. You found the letters, she said softly. He exhaled. You left them. I delivered the truth. Whether you open it or not is your choice. He followed her to a small cafe nearby. The place was empty except for an old radio playing a country song about regrets. She sat opposite him, her eyes sharp but kind. You're not the villain, Detective Holt, she said. You were the sword. Someone else was the hand. Raymond leaned forward. What do you want from me? To remember, she said simply. And then to act. She slid a flash drive across the table. Everything I've found. Emails, reports, voice notes. Clara Wynn was going to expose corruption in your department. She found out about a slush fund tied to charity donations. Mason Hale handled the money and someone higher up protected him. When Clara went missing, it wasn't random. It was ordered. Raymond's mouth went dry. Ordered by who? Elena hesitated, then said quietly, the name on the authorization for her surveillance, your name. But I think you already know who used your pen. The cafe felt smaller suddenly, the air thicker. He closed his eyes, hearing echoes of laughter from years past. After-shift drinks with Mason, the jokes about being untouchable, the quiet understanding that some people's mistakes could be cleaned up with the right paperwork. When he opened them again, Elena was watching him with something like pity. You still have time, she said. But not much. Hale knows I've been digging. If I disappear, the truth disappears too. She stood, leaving him with the flash drive and a choice. As she walked out, the radio crackled with static and a new song began, one he hadn't heard since 2009. It was Clara Wynn's favorite. He remembered playing the night before she vanished, when she'd stood in the station arguing about justice and decency, her voice steady, fearless. Now that song sounded like an echo from the grave, and for the first time in 30 years, Detective Raymond Holt realized he might have been serving the wrong side of justice all along. The drive home that night felt endless, headlights slicing through the rain like small knives, the wipers beating out a rhythm that matched the storm inside his chest. The flash drive Elena had given him sat on the passenger seat, a small silent thing that could burn everything he had ever built. Raymond wanted to throw it into the dark river, to pretend none of this existed. But something inside him, some dying ember of the man he thought he was, wouldn't let him. At home, Margaret was waiting in the living room, the lamp beside her casting a lonely pool of light across the carpet. She had a photo album on her lap, his old commendations, newspaper clippings, smiling faces. When she looked up, her eyes were wet. You were supposed to protect people, Ray, she whispered. Not disappear into your own shadow. He froze in the doorway. What are you talking about? She slid a folded paper across the table. It was a printed email, anonymous sender, time-stamped an hour ago. The message was short. Ask your husband what happened to Clara Wynn. Raymond's blood ran cold. Margaret's voice trembled. Who is she, Ray? And why is someone sending me threats? He couldn't answer. The truth was too tangled, too close to madness. Instead, he said what cowards always say when they are trying to hold a collapsing wall. It's just someone trying to stir trouble. Margaret shook her head slowly. No, it's someone trying to tell me who you really are. She rose, walked upstairs, and didn't look back. He stood there for a long time, listening to the house breathe. Then he opened his laptop and plugged in the flash drive. Folders filled the screen, documents, recordings, photographs. One of them was labeled Wynn Case Audio. His hand hesitated before clicking play. The recording began with static, then a voice, Mason Hales, unmistakable, lazy, and confident. Yeah, she got too close. The social worker had copies of the transfers. If she went public, it would have hit the department, the mayor, everyone. So I fixed it. Ray won't ask questions. He never does. He trusts me more than he should. A second voice entered, low and unfamiliar. You're sure you can handle it? Mason laughed. Handled. She's not coming back. The sound that escaped Raymond's throat was something between a groan and a prayer. He hit pause, staring at the screen as if it could undo itself. He called Elena immediately. Where did you get that recording? Her voice was steady but urgent. From a retired dispatcher. She made backup copies years ago. You're not safe, Detective. Hale knows the truth is surfacing. Raymond pressed his hand to his forehead. He's been in my house. He planted the letters. He's watching me. That's how they work, she said. They gaslight you until you stop trusting your own memory. A noise outside, gravel crunching under tires. Raymond froze. Through the window, he saw headlights creeping up his driveway. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. You should have stayed loyal. He killed the lights and moved to the window. A figure stepped out of the car, umbrella tilted low. Even through the downpour, he recognized the way the man carried himself. Confident, unhurried. Mason Hale. Raymond slipped the flash drive into his pocket and went out the back door, rain slapping against his face like cold hands. He crossed the yard and ducked behind the old shed. From there, he could see Mason on the porch knocking once, twice. When no one answered, Mason tried the doorknob. It opened. Raymond's pulse thundered. He had left the front door unlocked. Mason disappeared inside. For a few minutes there was silence, then faint movement. Drawers opening, papers shifting. Raymond edged closer, the mud sucking at his shoes. Through the kitchen window, he saw Mason standing under the ceiling light holding Margaret's photo album. He flipped through it, smiling faintly. Then he looked up right at the window and spoke. Though the glass muffled the words, Raymond could still read his lips. Too late, partner. The sound of a lighter snapped in the silence. Flames caught the edge of a curtain, spreading fast. Raymond lunged forward, crashing through the back door. Smoke rolled through the room like a living thing. Mason turned, surprised but not afraid. You should have left it alone, he said, voice low. You think you can play hero now? It's too late for that. You killed her, Raymond spat. Mason shrugged. We all killed her, Ray. You just signed the paperwork. Raymond's fist connected with Mason's jaw. The two men crashed against the table, the room a swirl of smoke and fury. Mason grabbed a knife from the counter, but Raymond slammed his wrist against the wood, the blade clattering away. They grappled, breath and fire and years of rot coming to a single violent point. Then the fire alarm screamed. Mason shoved him back and bolted for the door, disappearing into the storm. Raymond stumbled after him, coughing, half blind. Outside, the rain fought the flames, steam hissing where they met. Margaret stood in the street in her nightgown, eyes wide. Neighbors gathering with phones raised. He tried to speak but couldn't. The house groaned under the fire's weight. When the sirens came, so did the cold reality. Hale was gone. The recording was still in Raymond's pocket, proof that could destroy them all. But the world around him had already turned to ash. Hours later, wrapped in a blanket near the fire truck, he watched the smoke curl into the gray dawn. A paramedic asked if he had anywhere to go. He didn't answer. His wife sat on the curb, refusing to look at him. Then a police cruiser rolled up, and through the windshield he saw Hale again, dry, smiling, waving like a friend at a funeral. He mouthed something as he drove past. 3 words Raymond would never forget. You'll take the fall. And as the wreck of his home hissed behind him, Raymond realized Hale wasn't running. He was building the trap, and Raymond was already standing in the center of it. The next morning, the smoke still clung to his hair and skin like guilt that wouldn't wash off. The fire marshal said it looked accidental, an old circuit, faulty wiring, but Raymond knew better. He'd spent a lifetime reading lies dressed as truth. Hale had lit that blaze not to kill him, but to erase whatever pieces of the past still sat inside that house. He'd burned Raymond's life clean off the map, leaving him nothing but the flash drive, the badge, and a hollow name that no longer meant anything. Margaret was gone before sunrise. No note. Just her wedding ring left on the table beside a stack of wet photos that hadn't burned completely. Faces half melted, smiles dripping away. Raymond pocketed the ring without knowing why. Maybe because part of him still needed to believe in something that hadn't turned to ash. He spent the next 2 days in a motel off Route 6, curtains drawn, living on burnt coffee and silence. Every time a car passed outside, he flinched. The television spoke in static when he tried to sleep. But when he finally opened the flash drive again, clarity replaced fear. The files weren't just evidence, they were a roadmap to his own damnation. There were bank statements linking the department's charity fund to shell companies Mason had set up. There were internal memos showing donations rerouted through police accounts. There were photos of meetings, men in suits, city officials he'd trusted, all smiling in the dim light of a private lodge. And then one image stopped him cold. A candid shot of himself standing beside Mason at a fundraiser, hand raised in a toast, while Clara Wynne stood in the background, holding a folder close to her chest. The caption below, written in Elena's handwriting, read, "The night before she vanished." His stomach twisted. He had been there. He had talked to her that night. He remembered her saying something about a file she couldn't hand over yet, that she needed more time. Mason had offered to drive her home afterward. Raymond had even thanked him. That night had been the last time anyone saw her alive. He threw up in the sink. By the third day, he made a decision. If Hale wanted him to take the fall, he would give him something else. Instead, confession, the kind that could set the whole house on fire. He called Elena. "Tomorrow," he said, voice rough. "Court, 10 o'clock. I'm testifying again." She hesitated. "You understand what that means? You'll be finished." "I've been finished for years," he said. "I just didn't know it." He didn't tell her that he'd also received another message that morning, a simple text from an unknown number. "Court isn't safe. You won't make it there." He ignored it. Some truths are worth dying for, he thought. That night he drove to the precinct one last time. The building loomed under the streetlights, the same cold gray fortress that had once felt like sanctuary. He went inside, nodding to the desk officer who barely looked up. His office still smelled faintly of smoke from the files Hale must have rifled through before the fire. He pulled open the drawer where he used to keep his sidearm, slid the flash drive inside a sealed evidence envelope, and marked it with one word: justice. He left it on the chief's desk with a handwritten note. "Play this in court tomorrow." As he turned to leave, he noticed a small envelope taped to his door. The handwriting was the same thin, deliberate script from the earlier letters. He tore it open. Inside was a single photograph. Clara Wynne's body, half buried in the soil, eyes closed, her silver bracelet glinting under a flashlight beam. On the back, one line: "You could have saved her." The floor tilted beneath him. He grabbed the edge of the desk, fighting nausea. Mason had been keeping trophies, reminders of his control. And now he was reminding Raymond of his failure. By dawn, the courthouse steps were wet with rain. Elena waited near the entrance, her hair damp, her expression unreadable. "You're really doing this," she said quietly. "Yes. You might not leave alive." He nodded. "Neither will he." Inside, the courtroom was packed. Reporters lined the back wall, cameras flashing. The air buzzed with curiosity. The fallen detective, the mysterious woman, the scandal that could shatter a city. Mason Hale sat at the defense table, calm as a man at Sunday brunch. When their eyes met, Mason smirked, tapping 2 fingers against his badge as if to say, "You'll always be one of us." The judge called the court to order. Elena's attorney rose, asking permission to play newly submitted evidence. The bailiff carried Raymond's sealed envelope to the clerk. For a second, Hale looked almost amused, until the screen flickered to life and his own voice filled the room. "Yeah, she got too close." The words rolled through the silence like a tidal wave. Every face turned toward Hale. His smirk faltered. Then his attorney stood abruptly. "Your Honor, we object. This evidence was obtained illegally." The judge raised a hand, but before he could speak, Hale was already moving. He reached into his jacket, hand closing around something metallic. Shouts erupted. "Gun! Gun!" And chaos swallowed the courtroom. Raymond lunged forward instinctively, old training kicking in. He tackled Hale as the gun fired, the shot cracking through the ceiling. Papers flew, screams rose, the judge ducked behind the bench. They hit the floor hard, the gun skittering away. Hale snarled, eyes wild. You should have stayed loyal, Ray. Raymond's fists shook as he pressed the man down, but Hale's strength was manic, desperate. In that moment, Raymond saw the truth. His partner wasn't the same man he'd once trusted. Hale was a cornered predator, and Raymond was the prey that finally bit back. The bailiffs swarmed in, restraining Hale, dragging him up as he shouted curses that didn't sound like words anymore. Raymond rose slowly, chest heaving, blood ringing in his ears. Helena rushed to his side. You did it, she said breathlessly. He shook his head. Not yet, because as they hauled Hale away, Raymond saw something that froze him. A man in a gray suit at the back of the courtroom, nodding faintly, one of the city officials from the photographs. And in that single nod, Raymond understood. The rot went deeper than Hale. The system would try to bury this too. But he also knew something else. He wasn't afraid anymore. The truth was finally out, and he had chosen which side to die on. And as the courtroom doors slammed shut behind Hale's shouting, Raymond Holt realized that sometimes the only way to survive justice is to become its witness. Even if it destroys you. The courtroom emptied slowly, leaving behind the faint echo of footsteps and the metallic scent of spent gunpowder. Raymond sat alone at the plaintiff's table, his hands trembling slightly as the adrenaline drained from his body. The noise of the world felt distant now, reporters shouting outside, officers shouting orders. But inside him there was only silence, the kind that comes when the storm has finally broken everything worth saving. Elena stood near the doorway, watching him. Her eyes were red but steady. When she spoke, her voice was soft, almost reverent. It's over, Raymond. He gave a small, hollow laugh. No, Elena, it's never really over. It just changes shape. The bailiffs had dragged Hale out minutes ago, his wrists cuffed, his curses dissolving into the chaos outside. The flash drive, the one that carried the truth, was now state evidence. It would unravel everything. The charity fund, the police corruption, the political shield that had hidden the rot for years. And yet Raymond knew that exposing the truth didn't mean peace. It only meant light, and light can hurt when you've lived too long in the dark. As they left the courthouse together, the rain had stopped. The air felt rinsed clean, the way the world sometimes looks right before dawn. Reporters surged forward, cameras flashing, questions flying. Detective Holt, are you under investigation yourself? Did you know Mason Hale personally? Are you part of the conspiracy? He said nothing. Elena put a hand on his arm and guided him through the crowd. They walked in silence down the courthouse steps, two ghosts of the same fire, until they reached her car parked beneath an oak heavy with water. He hesitated before getting in. You said Hale wasn't acting alone. Who else? Elena turned toward him. You'll see soon enough. But first I need to show you something. They drove in silence for nearly an hour out past the edge of town where the fields rolled into wild country. The road turned to gravel, then to dirt until she stopped near an old farmhouse leaning into the wind. The sky was the color of bruised metal. Where are we? He asked. Elena's lips tightened. Someplace where the truth was buried before. She led him behind the house where the ground was uneven, marked by old police tape half buried in weeds. Raymond recognized it instantly, the original search site for Clara Wynne. He'd stood here years ago, notebook in hand, dismissing the locals' claims of seeing lights in the woods, ignoring the signs that something terrible had happened here because Mason had told him to move on. Elena crouched and brushed away the weeds, revealing a rusted piece of metal in the dirt, a fragment of an old license plate. She handed it to him. The numbers matched Clara Wynne's missing car report. We found it yesterday, she said. Her car's buried under there. Hale kept the bracelet as a souvenir, but someone else helped him hide the rest. Raymond stared at the ground, rain beginning again in small, cold drops. His knees weakened and he sank into the mud. All this time, he whispered. She was right here. Elena knelt beside him. You weren't the monster, Ray, you were the shield they used. But now you have a choice. You can stay the shield or become the sword. He looked up at her, and in her face he saw something he hadn't seen in anyone for years. Faith. Not blind belief, but the kind that asks a man to keep walking even when the road burns. That night they drove back into town. Hale's arrest had cracked the walls wide open. Officers were being suspended. Officials named in the press, and the city was devouring its own lies. But when Raymond turned on the television in his motel room, he saw something that made his stomach drop. The man in the gray suit, the one who'd nodded in the courtroom, was now on screen giving a press statement. The chyron beneath his name read, Deputy Chief Alan Rourke, Acting Police Commissioner. Rourke. The same superior officer who'd mentored both him and Hale decades ago. The man who'd told Raymond once, Justice is like a house, you don't tear down the walls just because the paint's peeling. It hit him all at once. Hale had been the blade, but Rourke had been the hand. The recordings only traced the money trail, not the command. Hale would take the fall, but Rourke would stay clean, and the machine would keep running. Raymond picked up the phone and called Elena. It's Rourke, he said quietly. He's the one who gave the order. Her breath caught. Do you have proof? Not yet, but I know where he keeps it. The next evening, Raymond walked alone into the station. Most officers avoided his eyes. Some nodded respectfully. Others turned away. He went straight to Rourke's office, the same place where he'd once received his Medal of Service. The older man looked up from behind the desk, smiling with the confidence of someone who believes he owns every room he enters. Ray, Rourke said, rising to shake his hand. You've had a rough week. Cut the act, Raymond said. It's over. Hale's done, and soon you will be too. Rourke sighed, motioning him to sit. You don't understand how this works. We built this department to protect the city, not tear it apart. Some sacrifices had to be made. You were a good soldier once, don't ruin that legacy. Raymond's voice was low but steady. A good soldier obeys. A good man does what's right. Rourke's expression hardened. Then I guess you stopped being a good man a long time ago. Raymond laid the recorder on the desk. Say that again, Chief, Rourke froze. The small red light blinked. In the corner of the room, 2 federal agents stepped forward, the same ones Elena had contacted that morning. The mask slipped from Rourke's face. He understood too late that the house of cards was finally collapsing. Hours later, when Raymond stepped outside, the night was clear for the first time in weeks. The stars looked impossibly close. Elena met him on the sidewalk, eyes shining. It's done, she said. He nodded. No, it's finally beginning. She smiled faintly. What will you do now? He looked toward the horizon, the faint blush of dawn coloring the edges of the sky. Live with what's left, and teach others not to make the same mistake. Months later, Raymond Holt lived quietly by the coast, volunteering with youth who'd fallen into the cracks he'd once ignored. The badge he'd worn for 3 decades sat on his desk, rusted, its shine long gone. Sometimes he still dreamed of Clara Wynn's voice, or saw Margaret's shadow in the surf. But when he woke each morning, he felt lighter, like a man finally walking toward the truth instead of running from it. One evening, he wrote in his journal, the final words that had come to define him. Power built without conscience is only delay before collapse. But truth is what survives the fire. And as the sun sank into the water, its light breaking across the waves, Raymond Holt smiled for the first time in years, because he had finally learned that redemption doesn't erase the past. It simply means you've stopped hiding from it,